2 years ago, I set up a 10-gallon black water tank for my neon tetras with a dirt substrate. I was setting up a number of dirted tanks that year, but this was really my first black water setup, and I was amazed at how easy it was to care for. I hardly did anything to it at all. Now, during that time, I started learning more about anoxic filtration and plenums, and I wondered, could a plenum work for a black water tank? How would it compare to a tank with a dirt substrate? Would it be as low maintenance? So I decided after 1 full year to take down the 10-gallon tank because I really wanted a larger black water setup anyway. And I saw this as an opportunity to try out the plenum in the new 29-gallon tank. Let it run for 1 full year and then compare it to the previous 10-gallon setup. Each tank has now run for a full year. Now it's time to compare the results. If you haven't seen the build video for each of these tanks, I encourage you to watch them first so you will know the details of each build, which will give more clarity to today's comparison video. Now, this is not a perfect comparison. These are different size tanks and there are some other variables, but I think it's close enough to give us a reasonable comparison. Well, let's begin by comparing the initial setup of both of these tanks. The 10-gallon tank had pretty cheap materials for the substrate, just dirt and sand that I had in another tank, and leaves and sticks that I gathered from my backyard, and a DIY planter for the peace lilies. And I mainly did just grow peace lilies in here. I tried a few other plants along the way, but none of them really worked out as well. Used a simple hang-on-the-back filter with a few modifications. I had basic lighting, just a clamp-on work light with an LED bulb. Now, the aquarium light was just for display purposes. I didn't leave it on constantly. In the 29-gallon, I used a few more costly substrate ingredients, namely the Fluval stratum and the fluorite red. And there still were some cheap ingredients as well: kitty litter, pea gravel, and sand. Now, this was a larger tank, so I had more substrate volume to deal with. The filter used was an under gravel filter, which acted as the plenum, and an air pump. Had simple lighting overhead, and again with display lights inside the tank, and a wider variety of riparian plants. What was the maintenance like for these tanks? Again, we'll start with the 10-gallon dirt substrate tank. During the first several weeks after setup, it did require weekly water changes, which is not unexpected. And things balanced out during the second month, and no more water changes were needed. No fertilization was needed for the peace lilies. Their roots grew down through the water and tapped into the substrate, which accelerated their growth. They had all the nutrients they needed in the dirt substrate. The hang-on-the-back filter only required monthly cleaning, and some months not at all, as long as it maintained good water flow. Tannins were easy to maintain simply by adding more fallen leaves as the older ones decomposed. There was really nothing more to it. This tank was very easy to maintain. For maintenance on the 29-gallon plenum tank, I'm not sure if you will believe this, but there were 0 water changes required after setting up this tank until the 7th month. I did do a water change just in case something unknown was building up in the water. At this point, some of you may be freaking out right now, saying, "What? You only did 1 water change for the whole year? How dare you? Your fish deserve better." If this is you, let's just simply take a deep breath. Let's open our mind to new possibilities, new ways of fish keeping, and exhale. Now, that feels better, doesn't it? Let's continue. Liquid fertilizer was needed during the first 7 months or so. Most of the plants were doing great, but some of them needed a little extra boost. And of course now, all these roots are totally permeating the entire substrate where ample nutrients abound. With the plenum and the substrate acting as the filter, there was no filter cleaning needed. No matter how many leaves or bags of rooibos tea that I added, I never could get the tannins built up in the water, which I think is because of the kitty litter in the substrate neutralizing the tannins, much like activated charcoal. So I think with a different substrate blend, or with just sand, I could easily achieve that darker water. I did scrape the front glass one time, and I pruned the riparian plants, which I did make a video about, and that's pretty much all the maintenance I did. Both of these tanks were super low maintenance. I do believe the 29-gallon Plenum tank was the lower maintenance of the two, simply because there were fewer water changes required and no filter to clean. The 10-gallon dirt tank did a great job of maintaining a black water environment simply because it could maintain the tannins in the water. The biggest drawback to it was the size. It was simply too small. When I first started this experiment, I thought the results were going to be more black and white. Like this one was obviously better than that one. But both of these setups really have more similarities than differences. Both are very low maintenance. They both utilize beneficial bacteria and a deep substrate and plants for water filtration, for processing waste. Both have dirt. The 10-gallon had a lot more when I first set it up, but the 29-gallon accumulates it over time, and it builds up in the substrate. As leaves are broken down, organic matter is broken down. Both have extensive root systems. I mean, look at this 29-gallon. The roots are filling up the substrate. They're even coming back up from the bottom. And when I took down the 10-gallon tank, the peace lily roots were so thick, when I pulled the plants out, most of the substrate came out attached to the roots, almost in one big mass. I think the difference between these two methods, it really just lies with the hobbyist and their skill level, their confidence level, and just individual preference. Some hobbyists are apprehensive about using a dirt substrate, and there are some things that can go wrong. If you have too much dirt and not enough of a sand cap, then the dirt can leach into the water column and sour the whole tank. And that can make the plenum method more appealing. However, with the plenum method, if your water flows too fast or you don't have enough nutrients in the substrate, it can be difficult to grow aquarium plants. Ultimately, there are many ways to successfully keep aquariums, and we are simply going to be drawn to what appeals to us most as individuals, based on our skill and confidence level and our personal preference. And we may find that that method that we were drawn to doesn't quite work, and we try another. That's part of the journey. What's important, I think, is that we avoid narrow-mindedness. This mindset of, this is the way I do it, and it's the only right way to do it. If we are open to exploration, we will discover new possibilities.